Mesdames et Messieurs les ministres, chers collègues, Madame la
Ministers,
Commissaire
dear
pour la Méditerranée,
colleagues, Commissioner for the
Monsieur l'envoyé
Mediterranean,
spécial du secrétaire général
Special
des Nations
Envoy
Unies,
of the Secretary
Mesdames
General
et
of the
Messieurs,
United Nations, ladies and
lorsque nous
gentlemen.
nous sommes retrouvés à Aqaba le 14
When we
décembre,
met
pour
in
la première fois
Aqaba
après la
on
chute
December
de
14th,
Bachar al-Assad, à
for the
l'initiative
first
de notre
time
collègue
after the
Ayman
demise
Safadi,
of Bashar
j'avais marqué
al-Assad,
la
on the initiative
disponibilité
of
de la
our
France
colleague
à
Ayman
organiser
Safadi,
une conférence
I
internationale
had
sur la
explained that
Syrie
France
dans le
was
prolongement des échanges
prepared to
initiés en
organize an
Jordanie et
international
poursuivis à
conference
Riyad le
on
12
Syria to follow
à
up on
l'initiative du
our
prince
discussions
Faisal
in
Ben
Jordan,
Avec le président de la
which
République
then
qui nous
were
rejoindra plus
also
tard, nous
extended in
souhaitons
Riyadh
que
on
cette
12th
conférence
of
soit celle de
January on the issue of
l'approfondissement
Prince
de
Faisal
nos
Ben
échanges,
Farhan.
qu'elle nous
With
permette
the
de fixer une ligne
President,
d'action
who will be
coordonnée en
bringing in
soutien à la
later, we hope
Syrie
that this
et aux Syriens
conference
avec des
will
engagements
be
précis.
a moment where we can
Je
have
voudrais vous
deeper
remercier
discussions, where
d'avoir
we
répondu à
can
notre invitation
set
et vous dire le plaisir
a
que
frame
j'ai à
for
vous
coordinated
accueillir
action to
aujourd'hui
support
à Paris.
Syria and Syrians with precise commitments.
souhaiterais
It's a
dire un mot en
pleasure for me to
particulier
see
à
you.
notre
Thank you for
collègue
joining us here
syrien,
in Paris. And
Monsieur
I
le
would like to say a
ministre
few
Shibani,
words to our
dont la
Syrian
présence
colleagues.
à Paris
Mr.
aujourd'hui marque la
Minister
première visite
Shibani,
officielle en
his presence
France
here
d'un membre
in
du
Paris is the
gouvernement
first
syrien
official
depuis
visit to
plus d'une
France
décennie.
of
Tout comme
Syrian
ma propre
authority
visite à
for
Damas
in the
avec Annalena Baerbock
over
le
10
3 janvier
years.
était la première
Our
en 15 ans.
meeting with
C'est une
Annalena
joie de renouer avec
Baerbock
la Syrie après
as
des
well.
années
Our
d'isolement
trip was the first in
international.
15
Et à travers
years.
vous, Monsieur le ministre, c'est au peuple syrien.
You are coming out of isolation now, and thank you very much, Minister. We wish you the best for this long-awaited period of transition. So over the past few weeks, dear colleagues, I have noted that all the countries and institutions represented around this table share the same goals for the future of Syria and the Syrian population. We must remain united in our determination to see the advent of Syria that is pacified, reunited, reintegrated in its regional environment. That is my first message. War and interference in Syria have meant that Syrians have paid too high and too cruel a price. Over 500,000 deaths, 12 million refugees are internally displaced persons, hundreds of thousands of prisoners and disappeared persons. Not one single Syrian family has been spared the crimes committed by the regime, bombings, torture, forced exile. But Syria's neighbors and the countries of the region have also borne the brunt of the Syrian conflict for over 13 years. Your countries, dear colleagues, have welcomed the largest proportion of refugees at a time where we are welcoming for this first international meeting our Lebanese colleague who was recently appointed. I'm thinking in particular of Lebanon. Your countries, too, were targeted by trafficking in Captagon, which was orchestrated by the Bashar al-Assad regime. And your countries, too, that had to live alongside a Syria that was unstable with many terrorist organizations roaming its land as a direct threat to your security. We hope that Syria will cease to be instrumentalized in an attempt to destabilize the region. We hope that today Syrians will be able to focus on a successful transition and into helping their country recover. We have to preserve this very tenuous hope that was born in Damascus on December 8th by allowing them to work peacefully. We must call for a comprehensive ceasefire across the Syrian territory in the north, northeast, and the south. We want Syria to be free, sovereign, united, unified, and stable. We need to remain united in the face of those that wish our demise. And we are prepared to support Syrian transitional authorities to achieve this goal. That is my second message. Dear Minister Shibani, you can count on Syria's friends. They are all here around you to help you in this task. There are huge challenges, and as a priority, we need to allow for the influx of humanitarian aid that is still badly needed in Syria, but also to facilitate financial and commercial flows that can allow the country to be rebuilt. That's why, with my European counterparts, we have quickly begun to call for a lifting of economic sanctions that were adopted to isolate the Assad regime. These sanctions that were issued by the UN or European or national authorities contributed to the fall of the Syrian regime. But today they must no longer constitute an obstacle to the recovery and reconstruction of the country.
prendra également toute sa part aux efforts.
And the European Union, through its commissioner, has already mobilized over 35 billion euros since 2011 and will take its full part in reconstruction. At this conference, before this conference, I convened a meeting between humanitarian workers and development workers and international funding agencies to set up a new coordination framework for international aid in support of Syria and Syrians. Coordination will also be necessary to support the efforts undertaken by the HCR to facilitate the return in Syria of the refugees who wish to return. We're also there to support you, depending on the needs you will identify as regards transitional justice and combating immunity. Syrians need to be able to heal their wounds and see restorative justice be instituted in their country. Otherwise, we may have individual scores settling, and any pacification and reunification efforts will remain vain. We met with representatives of Syrian civil society who met yesterday. They came to report back on their work and tell us about their concrete needs. And it was the first time in over 10 years that they actually were able to establish direct contact with an official representative of their own country. So we hope that this transition will be successful, and we are prepared to play our role. In order to reinvest massively in Syria, your partners also need some reassurances and have the assurance that you hear our messages. Friends can have a transparent and sincere dialogue even in difficult times. And for transition to be successful for your partners, that means that transition must be inclusive. And you need to take into consideration the aspirations of all Syrians, irrespective of their religion, their language, their community, or their gender. And I'm very glad to have seen, and that was your commitment, to see that you set up a multi-dimensional team to prepare this conference, and we certainly are confident that your new government will reflect the many dimensions of Syria. We are not here to voice unrealistic goals. We do not want to impose a method or impose unrealistic requirements, but we do need a clear calendar clear schedule that be committed to. A successful transition is also one that will allow swift re-establishment of security for all Syrians and all of Syria's neighbors. Guns must go silent across Syria, including in the north and the east, to avoid Daesh rearing its head again. The new situation in Syria must not be a threat to its neighbors or to Europe. I know that recently the Director General of OPCW came to Damascus recently. We need to continue fighting against chemical weapons, but also against drug trafficking. For transition to succeed, state institutions must also be strengthened and work for all Syrians. And of course, the main challenge is to ensure the delivery of essential services. You have huge challenges, but few resources. But you can count on our continued commitment to get human aid delivered. On your side, we ask you to facilitate the work of humanitarian workers. They must have free and unhindered access to the Syrian territory. You must also spare no effort to get the economy back on track and establish reliable procedures in terms of traceability of financial flows and accountability. So I would like to say once again that I'm very pleased to welcome you here in Paris, less than 3 months after the demise of Bashar al-Assad, for discussions that will be based on trust, that I hope will be rich, candid, constructive, and that I hope will help the Syrian population to rebuild its future. So we will be speaking behind closed doors in private. A new version of the draft declaration will be distributed during the conference. We are busy incorporating all comments. We hope that it can be adopted by consensus. If that is not possible, then at the very least France will adopt a statement as convener of this conference. Foreign Minister, I hand you the floor. Thank you once again for being
But it's not up to us to say, hey, you have to fight those terrorist groups. But what I'm saying is we're here to support you, so feel free. And also, here again, we are prepared to work with you on this. We want to make sure that Syrian sovereignty is respected, particularly as concerns fighting against terrorist organizations. We also want to protect Lebanon and particularly the south of the country, where the flow of arms has led to destabilization. And that is why the combat against these terrorist organizations is of such importance. So on the issue of security, I can also say that the SDF has also been very, very precious allies in the struggle against terrorism, and we also know what we owe to them. And those Syrian forces have been working hand in hand with the coalition, and I think now we have a duty to stand by them, and as we did in 2018 with the first withdrawals. And that is why involving them completely in the Syrian transition project should also be an objective. And I do think that your responsibility today is to get them on board and to also join forces, that you're both fighting against terrorist groups that destabilize the country and regain your sovereignty. And that is why it's important for your security and for your neighboring countries. Then we also have the issue of governance that is representative and respectful of one and all. The brightest and best of your people, in great part, are living abroad. They've suffered enough, and the international community, when they look at you, are very aware of these issues. Sometimes they say, look, they've barely had the chance to get started, and they're already facing criticism. I do think we need to be careful how we discuss such a sensitive issue. I would not like to call on you to do more than any other country could be capable of doing themselves. And I think with the enormous challenge that you're facing, we're all aware of how important this is, and we are all ready, we stand ready to assist you, and we want to work with the civil society in Syria. But once again, it's all about respecting the entire gamut of communities. This would have to be a precondition for stability for you, and it would also serve the objective of security, because it would be really easy to ensure stability in the region, because we know that it's going to require return. But this, if you're going to have a stable policy, it's important to be able to recognize every community, and that's a precondition for refugees to return, because very often they're living in very difficult situations, and the ministers from your neighboring countries around the table are very aware of them. That's why we came up here in France with this ad hoc procedure issued by local authorities, so that any refugees with refugee status here in France can spend time in back in Syria without losing their refugee status. And we do think that this is going to enable them to best put their talent to use. This is uncharted water for your country, and it's going to be very important for recovery and reunification. A third challenge is the humanitarian recovery and economic recovery after more than a decade of war. And at the European level, we have called for the lifting of sanctions so as to initiate a reconciliation. This morning, we wanted to offer the international community an effective and transparent framework which would deepen this process and re-engage donors. And France will honor the pledge that I've maintained since 2018 of earmarking 50 million euros for humanitarian aid and stabilization for the Syrian people. And we hope to resume diplomatic action in Damascus. And we've got the Agence Française de Développement, or AFD, which is delegating our operators to hopefully go very swiftly into Syria to discuss the priorities that we've identified with your country. And we're ready with our European partners to do more in this. And finally, justice and the struggle against impunity, because that's one of the topics that you discussed, and the regime has done everything to wipe out any trace of their victims, but I do think we owe it to their memory, and we've been victims ourselves of heinous crimes, that we have to swiftly move on to this task of ensuring justice. And I do think that it's a cornerstone of building peace and security in the country. And we stand ready to assist you in this regard, including when it comes to efforts for collecting evidence and victim identification, as we've done elsewhere. So there you go. Those are the main challenges that I see, but also that where we are prepared to mobilize. And I think everybody around the table today is ready to support you, because what you managed to achieve on the 8th of December, that is to move away from these dark times and obscurantism, I think means that there is a path towards hope. And we know that you have a heavy burden on your shoulders. And what I want to say to you is that we need to be both demanding, but also full of goodwill, as we say, that we have a duty to support you in your path forward, because the sovereignty of all of the Syrian people and also the stability of the region and of ourselves depends on it. And soon I'll be having President al-Shara here in France, and we'll be hoping to move forward on this. And France will reiterate its commitment, as we've done, even in the darkest hours, and we look forward to working on this together. Thank you.
67 days since the heroic resistance of the Syrian people brought down Bashar al-Assad's regime. Today in Paris, the third edition of a conference took place that began in mid-December in Aqaba in Jordan, and then continued in Riyadh, and which brings together all of Syria's partner countries who want to help the Syrian people, accompany them in this historic moment of taking back their own destiny. When it comes to the previous editions, in the Aqaba conference, there were three very significant results that came out of it. First of all, we created a declaration which is supported by 20 countries, including Syria, and 4 international organizations, including the Special Envoy of the UN, the European Commissioner for the Mediterranean, the Secretary General of the Arab League, and the Secretary General of the GCC. It's a very historic moment to have this declaration, and it shows how committed the partner countries are. Failure is not an option. Syria's success is the success of all of us. The second result is that civil society came to Paris yesterday, and they had an event on the fight against impunity, and they had a chance for the first time in a decade to talk with the government of their country. I received the Minister Shibani and representatives of civil society, and they were really very satisfied to be able to speak and have discussions with the government of their country and to begin to start molding the country's future. That's a very significant point as well. The third important result is that we gathered international donors. They met this morning with my delegate minister, and under the aegis of the UN, they are creating a working group to better coordinate their work so that they're working in the most efficient way to be as helpful as possible to Syria and the Syrian people. So those are the 3 main things that came out of the Aqaba conference process, the Aqaba process, and I welcome this. Now I'll say a few words on what has happened since the fall of the Assad regime in these 67 days. There have been a certain number of steps that we can welcome. There has been a preparatory committee created for the national dialogue. There are 7 people involved in that. 4 are from civil society, 2 are women. Along with my colleague Annalena Baerbock, we went to Syria in January, and so we welcome this. Secondly, on the 7th of February, the Director General of the OPCW went to Syria. That is a first step towards destroying chemical weapons, which will mean for Syria, for its neighboring countries, and for Europe, an end to this threat to their security. And that is also something that we were committed to during our visit to Damascus on the 3rd of January. Also, the Foreign Affairs Minister of Syria, of the interim minister, confirmed today that a new government will be appointed on the 3rd of March, the 1st of March, sorry. I believe that will be followed through with. And so, as the UN Special Envoy reminded us, there are only 14 days until the 1st of March, and those will be very important days. So these are a number of steps, but the general feeling among the participants was that the challenges are still huge, of course. The fight against terrorism, against Daesh and other groups, then the description of hidden weapons stockpiles, the integration of Syrian Kurds from the northeast of the country into the country, territorial integrity, which is facing foreign interference, which needs to come to an end, the economic recovery of a country that was being completely stifled by Bashar al-Assad, the return of refugees, and on that point, France has given an opportunity to Syrian refugees living in France the opportunity to have safe passage to go back to Syria and to not lose their protection in France. Then, of course, there's the question of institutions and the constitution, the fight against impunity, and looking into the fate of people who were disappeared. More than ever, we need work to be done by the international community and partner countries to make sure that Syria and the Syrian people can succeed. Among the things talked about by participants at the conference, we spoke, of course, about the need for the access of humanitarian aid. That's essential. Lifting sanctions to allow for the economic recovery of the country, but also financial, economic, and energetic aid that could be brought, as well as technical support, expertise, which has been offered by a number of countries, including France, particularly in terms of the fight against impunity, collecting evidence. And I spoke about this with the minister, the Foreign Affairs Minister, and then more generally looking at memory and dealing with to make sure we can move forward and that we can make sure that the Senaya prison, which was a real abattoir, real extermination camp, so that place can become a sort of remembrance site and a place that can help move towards reconciliation. So that's what I can share with you at the end of this day of discussions and of work. which has been aiming to make sure that this hope, which is fragile but very real, can become real.
Thank you, Minister. We're going to take a few questions. So, number one.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Ministre. Cécile Fayette.
No, Mr. Cécile Fayette, AFP. Now, today you open the conference by calling for a ceasefire across the entire territory, including the north. Now, you just mentioned Syrian Kurds. I'd like to know if you see that there are any possibilities for compromise between Kurds in Syria and in the northern part of the country and Damascus. And also, do you know if countries are prepared to increase their humanitarian aid in the region given the freeze on humanitarian aid from the United States? Now, in closing the conference, the President earlier on said that we contributing 50 million euros of humanitarian aid to Syria in 2025. It is still too early to think about possible implications of a total interruption, cancelling of U.S. aid for the moment is just suspended. So France, through the AFD, will be providing humanitarian aid, but also development aid, and the AFD will be going to Syria very soon. There's also aid from EU, and that will come and shore up any bilateral aid provided by individual member countries. You are correct to point out that, yes, indeed, we are calling for a ceasefire over the entire country. That's what I told Ahmed al-Shara when we met him together with Annalena Baerbock in early January. We said that we had concerns over a potential attack or offensive against Kobane. And we also, as I've just said, we would like the Syrian Kurds to be an integral part of the recovery of the country and be recognized with full citizenship. And that, of course, will take mediation. We want to facilitate that mediation between the leaders, Kurdish leaders in the northeast of Syria and transitional leaders, and also with the Turkish authorities and the Kurds in northeastern Syria, as well as with Iraqi authorities. So we want to help discussions go forward in the interest, of course, of peace in Syria, and once again, in a framework where all stakeholders will be involved in an inclusive approach. Second question. Shukran, thank you. My name is Amar Khalife for Al Jumhuriya website. Today with President Macron, you called for the participation of all all components of Syrian society in these steps forward. Of course, ethnic and religious components, I think that you meant. And you did not mention political components. Many Syrians want to take a political part in the process, irrespective of their ethnic origin, their religion. Yes, we want a full citizenship regime in Syria with no first-class or second-class citizens. That is what civil society wants in Syria, and an effort that we have been supporting for over 10 years. That is also the desire of the transitional authorities, talking about second-class and first and second-class citizens. I will quote those were words used by the transitional foreign affairs minister. Third question from LCI, Madame Boudou.
Monsieur le Ministre, Liseron Boudou, le TF1 LCI. Tout le monde se demande quelle va être la...
Everyone is wondering what the United States strategy, as well as President Trump's strategy, will be in Syria. Do you know anything more about that today?
Veulent-ils rester en Syrie militairement?
Does the U.S. want to stay in Syria militarily and with humanitarian aid as well? If they withdraw, what would that change for French involvement in Syria as well as European involvement in supporting the transition government? Thank you. Thank you for your question. Well, I don't want to play guessing games, but your question allows me to further talk about why France finds it so important to focus on Syria, especially. We're focusing on Syria because it has to do with our security, the security of French people. Bashar al-Assad's criminal regime allowed Daesh to reinforce and spread across Syria and the entire region to plan terrorist acts which happened in Europe as well. And now this new bright future for Syria and this transition period can allow to fight against that.
Proche ou lointain, menacer la
soon,
des Françaises et des Français.
Soon, terrorist plots might again threaten the safety of French people and European people. So that's why France fought with our partners against Daesh for 10 years long in Syria. And that's to protect our own safety, our own security. The security of American citizens is also threatened by these threats, and so that is why Marco Rubio has taken as a doctrine, a diplomatic doctrine, to only take decisions that are in American interests. It's in the American interest to fight against an eventual resurgence of terrorism in Syria, and that is what we said to the new Syrian administration and the new United States administration. If for some unforeseen reason the United States decided to withdraw from Syria precipitously, well, we'd have to see what the results would be, but France would stay in Syria because our security depends on it. Thank you. Another question from Mr. Kneber.
Bonjour, Hussein Kneber, Al Arabiya.
Hello, I'm from Al Arabiya. The president just said that Syria has always been has always destabilized Lebanon. Does France want to keep its engagement to stabilize Lebanon? There's been recent destabilization attempts. Yes, thank you for your question. I'd like to talk about Lebanon as well. I'm pleased to see that our recent diplomatic efforts from the past few months have had positive effects. We're not quite done, but we've recently seen a new government in Lebanon, and I was very happy to welcome for his first foreign trip, Joe Raggi, the new foreign affairs minister in Lebanon. And there's also been a new president, a new prime minister. There's been a ceasefire which happened at the end of November, and France and the United States cooperated to bring that ceasefire about. When I went to Syria, we spoke about the border with Lebanon, which is a porous border, and because of that porosity, it's served as a route for Hezbollah to follow. Because that border is a porous border, we want to help Syrian authorities as well as Lebanese authorities to help reinforce that border.
Nous continuons
That's why we want to help them.
les forces armées
And
libanaises.
we'll keep helping the Lebanese armed forces so that they can deploy in the south of Lebanon in order to
de protection de la frontière.
help enforce that ceasefire, to protect the border at the south of the country,
Si je résume,
but in the north of the country as well.
en soutenant les forces
So if I
armées
had to sum up,
et en ayant
I'd say that we want to support the Lebanese armed forces. We want to encourage more and more contact between the Syrian and Lebanese military.
Nous tentons de faciliter la
And we want
sécurisation
to
de la frontière qui nous paraît
help the
de manière
Lebanese border to be more secure, which is
pérenne.
a necessary thing, and it has to be a sustainably secure border. And we could do even more
Si besoin
if
était,
necessary.
Pour faire en sorte que cette frontière soit effectivement une
We
garantie.
have to make sure that it's a secure border.
Merci, Monsieur le
Thank
Ministre. France 24.
Thank you, Minister. A question from France 24.
Monsieur le ministre, Wassim Nas de France.
Minister, my name is Wassim Naz from France 24. You started off by talking about France's role in terms of mediation. Can you disclose a bit more detail about the mediation? For example, foreign jihadi fighters in prisons that are managed by Syrian Democratic Forces, also those detained by the MPG forces or the Tishrin Dam or returnees to Afrin. Can you tell us where there are blockages and where there's progress?
Ne comptez pas sur moi pour révéler
Well,
les
you certainly won't get any secrets from me in
critiques.
any revelations as to some discussions that have to remain secret because they are crucial for Syria's future. But you are nevertheless raising very important points.
Pour ceux d'entre eux qui
And
traitent directement à notre sécurité.
we are indeed very attentive to those points, especially when there are implications for our own security. For example, terrorist combatants from Daesh or others, tens of thousands of them are detained in Syrian prisons.
Ce ne sont pas les
Now, as I tried to explain,
amis de la Syrie centrale qui
of course,
doivent faire la leçon ou
foreign countries that are friends of Syria are there not to lecture Syria or tell Syria what to do, but we can act as mediators to bring different components of Syrian society around the same table and get them to talk. But because of the very cruel suppression by the former Syrian regime, they were not able to do that. And we need to make sure that they can get around the table safely. So the situation has now turned around, and our role, as I said, is to facilitate that discussion, but I can't reveal any details. Thank you. One last question.
Mona de
One last question.
Mona Saïd,
Mona Saïd, MTV Lebanon.
Vous avez reçu
Minister.
Monsieur Raji ce matin.
You spoke with Mr. Raji this morning. So this conference on Lebanon, is it still on the books? Will France organize a conference for Lebanon in the short future? Also, in a few days, Israeli troops were supposed to withdraw from Lebanon. Things are becoming more complicated. Do you fear new sparks setting off new clashes in southern Lebanon? Well, once again, I'd like to commend Joe Raji for his nomination, as well as his other brilliant colleagues. Now, our president, when he traveled to Lebanon a few weeks ago, said once again that France was prepared to organize a conference on the reconstruction of Lebanon with Saudi Arabia. Now, Lebanon's new government is less than a week old, so we will need to leave the new team enough time to familiarize themselves with priorities. But with that new team in place, we will talk about the appropriate date and schedule for that conference on reconstruction. Sometimes, you need to take good news as good news. And even 2 days before before the election of President Aoun, there were naysayers saying it wouldn't be possible. Well, they were proved wrong, or they said it would be impossible to designate a prime minister, and it happened. But we can expect the formation of a new government to take close to a year. But no, they are proving us wrong. Indeed, a new government is being formed. And so this is, I think, changing the mindsets of the Lebanese people. They want now to decide on their own future. And so Joe Raji confirmed this morning. I think that we can be confident that the new government will be able to achieve its ambition to bring the different Lebanese components around the table and offer them a cohesive future. Then there is the ceasefire, indeed, which was extended through to the 18th of February. After that, that date should see the final withdrawal of Israeli troops from the south of Lebanon. We have endeavored to design a proposal that could be acceptable, that would meet the security expectations of Israel, because Israel wanted to stay longer than what is provided for in the ceasefire along some parts of the blue line. So some of the contingents that form the interposition force of the United Nations in Lebanon, including the French component, may stay a little longer along a number of observation points. The Secretary General of the United Nations on Tuesday morning confirmed that he agreed with the proposal, and it was a battle hard fought. And now we need to convince the Israelis that this proposal will allow the full and we hope final withdrawal of the Israeli forces from South Lebanon. Thank you very much. This is the end of the press conference.